Thanks very much for the introduction, Anna, and thanks, Melissa, for the opportunity to have a chat. Yes, my name is Dr. Lauren Istvandity, and I'm really keen to have a chat. Like, I haven't done anything really formal with my slides or my talk, because I think it's really great to just have these things talking on a bit of a level. Rather than frame this as like an academic life story, well, there is a bit of that, but I really like to use this as a bit of a reflective opportunity that might highlight, some of these really common challenges for ECRs. I guess with cheek, I still call myself an ECR. I have a DECRA, so technically I should still be an ECR, but am starting to merge out of that, at that time of academic career. So I got my PhD in 2014. So this is, 10 years of being an ECR that have, sort of feeding into what I'm saying today. I've got some slides. The slides are okay to have on the screen. Sometimes I might duck out of them a little bit as well. So before I start, just paying respects to elders past, present and emerging, acknowledging that these lands were never ceded, and I'm speaking from Quandamooka country today. Yes, we're navigating the early research career, and I wanted to provide a little bit of context about myself before I start. And when I miss out things, there's obviously a chance at the end for you to ask questions. So you can always pick me up on a few things. The context is I did my PhD at Griffith University, and this is where I really started to, as I was saying before to Melissa and co, I really started to walk the line between music and psychology. And my PhD focus was on music and autobiographical memory, so how music prompts personal memories. And so from that, I started to develop this concept of the lifetime soundtrack. So that's something that's carried me through quite a few years and publications talking about how that evolves. But it wasn't psychology. I'm a music Bachelor of Music graduate. So continuing on with the context, so I did my PhD. Before I finished, I was lucky enough to start picking up some RA work, worked for my supervisor on her discovery project. So that was Sarah Baker's discovery project on DIY music archives. Then I was doing more research in some smaller interdisciplinary teams. That's where I started to work with, measures of well-being in migrant communities. I was also doing some teaching. So I taught with Dr. Tim Byron. Some of you might know about his earworm and hooks work. So he's a good friend of mine, and yeah, we were doing the music psychology course at the Queensland Conservatorium for a little while. Sure if that's still going, actually. But yes, he was heading that up. So then I was lucky enough to get a couple of postdocs. So living this long-term precarious life of, ongoing contracts. So it might be a year, it was, 2 years at some points. So I had a couple of postdocs, and I spent a lot of time writing applications that were rejected. Let's put big flashing lights around how many of those I did, and how many, really hopeful interviews I had, and new, outfits that I bought to really impress that panel, and, not really getting anywhere at that stage. That's pretty normal, I think, but it doesn't mean that it's easy. Then I was able to land a lectureship at University of the Sunshine Coast. So I was there for the past 4 years, and then hooray, I got a DECRA in 2024, and that led me to be back at Griffith Uni. So the other kind of context that I want to put in is that I really consider myself to be very ordinary. I'm an ordinary person with a relatively ordinary tenure track journey, although that's becoming less regular now. But I've had some some strokes of good fortune, which, I feel are, a balance of right place, right time with some strategic thinking involved of trying to put myself in the right place at the right time. And I'm also a person who, like most ECRs, has had to make really difficult choices about their career, about their life, and those things are really intertwined. So a little bit of what I say is about that, because you can't really, extricate yourself from life to just be an ECR. Like, it doesn't work like that. But yes, so, I'm finding myself in a really fortunate position right now, and it's actually a really nice point at which to sort of reflect back on that ECR journey. So I wanted to frame my talk a little bit in some ways. These are my ECR life lessons. I thought I could get it down to 3. So the first one is that you make your own luck. As I said, you can put yourself in the path of luck, hopefully. Love your work, but take a break and believe that you're enough. So these are some themes that will sort of come through what I want to touch on, and the topics that I wanted to go through, which are somewhat related, somewhat linear, in a sense of, how it is to be an ECR. So things like publishing, funding, work-life balance, and then I'll talk a little bit about my DECRA experience. Okay, so I want to talk briefly about publishing first, just touching on that, because I think it's or it feels like it's a really important part of the work that you do as an ECR is to publish. And it's not the only thing, of course, but often when it comes down to putting yourself on a piece of paper in front of other people, you'd like your publications to tell people a bit about what you do, and for it to be a good story. So my first sort of lesson or tip or things that I like to try to pass on to people who are, just finished their PhD is to collaborate and don't procrastinate, because I'm really good at procrastinating, and I find new and creative ways to do that every day. But if we can manage that, talking to a room full of people who know a bit about psychology, so if you can find ways, to help you alleviate the procrastination, I'll leave that bit up to you. But I'm thinking about how you can draw on collaboration to help you with your writing and publishing. So, I'm sure your mentors and supervisors or ex-supervisors have told you how important it is to publish regularly. And some people have writing superpowers. Some people I know can just pump out papers and they're really great at it. But I think they're pretty few and far between. I think most people, take a little while to get going. They have to have a habit or a routine to really help it work. So my tip is about collaborating, and I talk about collaborating in 2 ways. So first is collaborating on a piece of research or a piece of writing together. So finding people that you trust, that you have mutual areas together that you can write together. A lot of my ECR publications are collaborative publications because first of all, I had a great small network of people to work with. And it taught me that if you can develop a good writing relationship with someone, you can pump out quite a lot of publications that are significant and meaningful and also beneficial for you both. So being able to work with other people is important, even when academia seems like such a solitary thing a lot of the time. Have a plan of what you want to do solo. Obviously, you want to have your own things that you're going to do and write and publish, but then collaborating with others and thinking on the scale. Are you going to write journal articles? Are you going to hold a symposium and then do an edited collection out of it? How are you going to do something that's beneficial for your resume, for getting your work out there, all those things. The second way you can collaborate is the collegial and social way. Like I'm a pretty big introvert, and I like to be kind of doing my own work rather than talking to people all day. I think yesterday I talked to 6 people, and it was more than all of the people I talked to in the whole last week. I was exhausted. So I get that we don't always necessarily want to do things this way, but if you've got, I mean, you're in a network right now, but if you have a local network or an online network that you can do writing groups with, or maybe they're feedback groups where you put out a piece of writing and people give you feedback on it. I think that this is collaboration as well, and this can be a way to hold space for each other and to strengthen each other's work without necessarily writing together. So, having the space to write and then talk about your publishing strategies with people, again, like people you trust, and probably people who are working on slightly different areas than yours, and it's of no consequence, what you say to them about your ideas, because they're not going to steal them, and having this nice group of people to do that with can be very, very effective. And yes, as I mentioned before, if we're thinking about strategy and publishing, and I'm probably going to contradict myself later about what I'm about to just say, but think about the story that your publications say in the long term. Now, obviously, you can't be a huge predictor of what all of your future publications are going to be, and when you start, you just have to start, like just put some things out there and hopefully get some runs on the board. But one of the challenges I faced in the sort of middle section of my ECR journey was that I had publications from lots of different areas starting to pop up. So I had the music and well-being side. I also had music and heritage. I had some other publications that I'd co-authored with other people, which was actually part of a position that I had, which was to help people actually put a publication out within the university. So there were a couple of outliers to what might have otherwise been considered quite a consolidated, story. So there was a bit of work to do there. And it's something that I've had to work on even through the DECRA application. It was like, well, who are you? Who are you and what do you do? And for lots of people, it can be very straightforward. I'm an aeronautical engineer, but I'm not that. I do all of these different things and they continue to interest me. So I'm not going to not do music and well-being. I'm not going to not do music and heritage so that I focus on one. So you have to find a way to knit them together. And so when you are publishing and thinking about what your next move is going to be, think about what narrative you're constructing in doing that, insofar as you can. We can't see into the future, but we can have a think about it. Is this going to be beneficial? Or if somebody approaches you for a new project and oh yeah, that would be more publications, but is it in my area exactly? Is it going to benefit this, or is it actually going to kind of throw off the kind of narrative that I'm trying to build when I'm reflecting how it's written down on paper? So the other thing I wanted to talk about is funding, chasing funding, particularly when you are doing precarious contracts and you've come off the PhD, which is hooray, you've done this big project and you've been supported, hopefully, through that project with some financial support. And now it's okay, well, I want to do more research, but I need some more funds to do it. And we also want to have runs on the board in terms of getting some funding. So what I had to sort of do, maybe not everybody has to do that, but I really had to rewire my thinking about the research that I wanted to do versus the research that would more likely get funded. When I was an undergraduate doing my music degree, I loved analyzing music. I would write out chords and melodies and do various kinds of analyses on them and draw out lyrics and think about how all those things fit together. But that was the first time I had to deal with this question of, so what? I was yeah, I really like doing it. It's really cool. And I get, I can, extract all of these things that, have some meaning to them. But the application of that, I just couldn't find. That's not to say it doesn't have an application. It certainly can do. But for the kinds of research I wanted to do, it wasn't something that would get me government funding. It wasn't really something that would get me state level funding or institutional funding. So that's really where I had to go, okay, what kinds of things am I interested in that will also solve a problem? What's the problem that you're solving? Of course, not all of the problems are like, finding world peace and things like that. Like, we have to think of the grain of sand on the beach of knowledge level of problem. But thinking about, having that narrative of who you are and what you do, this is where I was going to contradict myself. That's right. So you've got this narrative of who you are and what you do. But you might have to be a bit flexible with that in order to find that application, in order for what you're doing to be seen as appealing to a funding body. So, as an ECR, I would often cruise the web for grants, thinking about, what can I find? I'm going to be, really diligent trying to find where are these grants and, how can I get them? And sometimes I would write off grants that didn't appear to directly match my expertise areas. But I'm thinking that that's kind of a limiting practice that can also set you down this path of, there's nothing for me here. Why am I doing this research? I quit. Everything sucks. So don't do that. You might have told yourself, I am this kind of researcher and this is the only research that I do. I'm a qualitative researcher in popular music studies, and an advanced Queensland grant is not suitable for what I'm doing. On the surface level, yes, the strategic priorities of particular grants are not always going to suit your work. But this is where I think there's an opportunity to think strategically, seems to be my favorite word in this presentation, about how your research might in fact be able to meet the needs of particular priorities that are set up in grants. So read between the lines of what they're saying and think a little bit more abstractly about how your research might in fact, apply there. So it might be something like being able to collaborate again with other people. So if it's like, well, I have this partial skill set, but what if I teamed up with somebody else who could fill in the rest of that skill set, and together we can make this really exciting, innovative project that actually meets the needs, of the funding body. So there's this sense of, both being flexible enough with your thinking about what you do, in order to, think about how you can solve problems. What are the problems and how can we solve them? Because increasingly there's not a lot of funding for what they call, the blue sky research, and the olden days thinking of what it means to work in a university was sitting and thinking and more of a philosophical approach to things, which is still great, but it doesn't really bring in as much funding anymore. So they want to see applied thinking about what your research is going to contribute. So that took me a while, honestly, and it still takes me a while to go, how is what I'm doing, or how is what I'm going to do, solve a problem? So that's my thinking there. So skipping forward, work-life balance is a tricky thing, and I think academics everywhere struggle with it. And I think as an ECR, there's a lot of pressure to be working all the time, to be working for free quite a bit as well, because you might have to put publications together, off your own bat, through your own PhD research or whatever you're doing. And there's a lot of pressure to just keep going and keep working because, you want to be the cream, you want to rise to the top, you want to be picked for the panel, you want to be, given the job, those kinds of things. So I think I've got a couple of, strong thoughts on work-life balance that I probably didn't really implement until later on in my ECR life. So if you've lost, your life, as in the things outside your passions for research and work, you need to go out and do things. You need to do things that are outside of work, in order to keep your sanity for all kinds of reasons. And I'm sure that you all really enjoy the area of research that you're doing, but sometimes space is actually the most productive thing you can do for yourself, is actually stepping away from your work and giving yourself regular breaks. Academia can be equal parts headache and joy, and sometimes the scale tips the other way. So you need to keep your own scale balanced as well. I try to remind myself, at the end of your life, people won't ask how many hours you worked in a week. They're not going to ask how many conferences you went to, how many people you spoke to at those conferences. They're going to, ask, what did you do? How did you make people feel? So go out and do some other things apart from, toiling away. Whether it physical activities or traveling or going out in the bush or whatever it is that you like to do, cooking, markets, whatever. Make time for it and make it productive time. Actually relax. I have a hard time with that. That's the message. Do try. And as I've said on the slide, if you don't take breaks, your body will take one for you, and it won't necessarily be a convenient time for your body to take that break. So yes, it's, take in with a grain of salt that you might find yourself in particular contexts or peak times of work where, there's like, okay, well, it's going to be a little while till I can take that break. But there is a degree of needing to do it for yourself. Wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about my experience in applying for DECRAs. So I'm not sure how many people are interested in applying. So I guess I didn't want this to be like an exclusive, this only applies to, people applying for DECRAs. If you are applying for any grant or job or, these kinds of things, you're going to have similar kinds of experiences. So it's, what I say here is not really meant to be exclusionary, but more just a sharing of what it was like. And I think, we all know or have been told that the path to ARC funding is a challenging one, and it's not exactly straightforward. I mean, they're trying to make things a little bit more straightforward, but it's also really long. It's a really long process. So I think that the DECRA application is challenging, not just for the format, but due to the fact that there's often people in precarious career stages and stage of life when they're applying for these things. So it's like everything collides. It's not just having to apply for the DECRA, but the fact that your contract is ending, or other things are happening in your life, that make putting time aside to work on it and to have it be the center of your existence for a while is really difficult. So that can be really, really hard. As I started out at the beginning saying, these things are entwined, your career and your life. Without the paid career, your life is not looking so great, and life without doing something that you've worked really hard for is not ideal either. So it's a real tension point, I feel, particularly around DECRAs. People might be facing all kinds of challenges. So, whether it's like, where am I going to live? What's my income going to be? Am I going to be able to, afford a house? Am I, starting a family? Do I have to care for parents or grandparents or, whatever? So I think there's, a lot to be said for it's not just that. It's not just applying for the DECRA, it's everything else that's happening around it. So, for me, the DECRA journey is really tied around what for me was, a big choice at that time, some years ago, which was having a family of my own. And I'm not sure how many of you are in that headspace now or might be soon, but amongst all of the challenges, there was these thoughts about whether having children would mean the end of my career, and what it would mean to, get a DECRA, or would I, have children and then be able to get a DECRA, or would I just cut, come out of academia altogether. Like, what was going to happen? I didn't know. Like, I was on, non-permanent contracts, trying to make it work. So it was very precarious, and lots of people are in similarly precarious positions. It might be all of those other things I mentioned and beyond, but that's what it was for me. But as I've seen lots of other terrific women academics do, I threw caution to the wind. So I submitted my first DECRA attempt, and I had to look it up in my emails, but it was on my birthday in March 2018, and I received word that it was unsuccessful in November, and by then I was 6 months pregnant. I was disappointed, but I wasn't terribly phased. I, had been conditioned enough to know that the first attempt may not be successful. So I'd had that pumped into me so much that I wasn't terribly disappointed. I got very good rejoinders, so I was hopeful. I got okay assessments, put in a strong rejoinder, but, didn't get it. And so then I took 9 months off in 2019, and then was really lucky to land a lectureship that started in 2020. And I knew I still had another chance of the golden chalice of funding. So I said I kept that up my sleeve. And then we had COVID lockdowns, and with the allowances for dependent children, I was able to have a bit more time to get together my second attempt. This time, I wrote it in the nap times of my second child, on the days that I worked from home, who turned 1 when I submitted the second application in November of 2022. So I'm telling you this, not to like glamorize the process, and not to make you think I'm some kind of writing superhero who can whip things up at the drop of a hat, because I've told you how bad I am at procrastinating. But when you have really short pockets of time to do work, sometimes that's the exact motivator that you needed to actually do it. I had lots of help from mentors outside of my university at the time, and I was very motivated to put together a strategic, that's my word of the day, and feasible project that was also suitably ambitious, and as I am now finding, very ambitious in fact. So my project pulled together all the threads of my track record up to that point. So I mentioned before that I had actually quite a disparate looking CV, and my top-sided paper is like, it's like oversighted. In fact, I think like for it's a systematic review, but that's the top-sided paper. Like, there's no like meat in that, like data meat in that. It's just a systematic review, but it is like a real outlier, and the threads of that aren't really shown through the rest of my track record. So I had all these different kinds of threads. I thought, how can I pull them together in something that's going to make me look like the best person to do this project, which is what any grant, but particularly DECRA's, that's part of it. Are you the best person to do this research? Yes, because I pulled the research together from all of my threads. So that took a while though, but like, don't underestimate that took me like 6 months to do. I had to think about that for a long time and test out ways of doing it to really kick this project into shape. So as I said, you've got those areas of heritage, music, well-being, but I also work with communities, including culturally and linguistically diverse communities. So my DECRA project is called Harnessing Creative Heritage for Migrant Wellbeing in Museums and Libraries. And I keep this screenshot on my desktop whenever I have imposter syndrome. And remember the day that I saw this and I was teaching a class and I had to keep teaching, even though I saw this online. But the project draws on an original method that I trialed in my postdoc research. So I could do, you can do smaller projects when you're doing a 1 or 2 year postdoc, if you're lucky enough to get those. And so I used that, saying, look, I've already done this foundational work. And that method is to use creative practice, and in this case, music, to assist with filling gaps in archives. Could be institutional archives, could be community archives, but the idea is that you're empowering communities to rewrite their own stories and their own histories, and they use a performative medium, which is a really great way for communicating more broadly to publics. So part of the DECRA as well is looking at what the wellbeing impacts of doing that are. on these particular communities. So it all sort of, seems like in a neat little package here, but there's a lot of, there's a lot of work behind it. I did have some great mentors. But I think my best advice, if you're applying for a DECRA or for any grant, is to think about what your knowledge and skills can contribute, and consider the application of your research to issues in the here and now or in the future. So what are the issues that you can, pull out conceptually from your work, and how can you help solve those things? So I wanted to, wrap up and conclude a little bit. So I had these themes of making your own life, of loving your work but taking a break, which I believe I've covered off enough in the things that I've said so far. But believing that you're enough is something that I wanted to just string out a little bit here as a way of concluding. And I think it's, a fitting enough finish for, an ECR audience. For me, having, come through all of this, probably something I lacked was self-confidence. And I still do. That's just kind of who I am. And part of that's just accepting, I'm a pretty self-deprecating kind of person. But being enough, sometimes as ECRs, we receive lots of message about how much we need to produce, or how active we need to be in the scene, or, organizing this, or being on editorial boards, that, and so on and so forth, which can lead to these drops in self-confidence, and we don't feel like we're good enough for academia, or we will never get that grant, or we'll never have that opportunity. And we can often hear from success stories that make us feel like we'll never be as good as such and such. I feel that a lot whenever I would hear people talk about their work and they're the next level up from me. I was like, oh, how will I ever be able to do that? But my message is that comparison is the thief of joy. We all face different circumstances, challenges, and opportunities that can steer our academic path in ways that we didn't really expect. So me speaking to you today isn't meant to be a comparative study. You're not meant to say, well, Lauren did all of these things, and, I haven't done this, that, or the other yet. It's not really meant to be about that. It's more of a reflection, saying these are some of the pinch points. And so speaking from my own book of life, that quiet self-confidence is a really valuable thing for you to feel secure and know that, you are doing the best that you can. And you can achieve your goals if you persevere. So that's a note of positivity that I'd like you to carry forward from today. And I'm going to leave my talk there. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Lauren. That was wonderful. Thank you for this really nice overview of kind of, I love the 3 themes coming out as well.